Hello and welcome back to Honey Badger 3D Print and Paint. Today we are taking a look at the finished Azrael from Berserk, from Berserk 3D, from a Patreon. Before we get started, roll those credits. Okay, welcome back. So, I love this model. So this model came from Berserk 3D, B3D Zerk, Berserk, I'll just call them for the time being to save a bit of time. For anyone who's looking for their Patreon, I will put a link in the video description. They do some stunning DC models. And what I really like about their Patreon is that they tend to do slightly less well-known characters. So Azrael is a DC character from the Batman universe. He's kind of an anti-hero in the sense that he fights similar to Batman, but he kills people basically. He's got a big kick-ass sword, all sorts of stuff. I really love him. So his whole theme is he's like sort of a crusader-y knight kind of deal. This is actually part of a set. So there is another piece that goes here, and there's a Nightwing that sort of stands there, and then they become this sort of quite large diorama. The problem is that this guy is 960 millimeters tall. He is 600 millimeters long and about 400 millimeters wide. He's a chunky boy. Now, he just about fits on my desk. He stares at me very judgingly when he does sit there. It's quite unnerving most of the time. If I was to do the Nightwing as well, the Nightwing would double the width, so it would be about 1.2 meters long. The diorama base actually comes out a little bit further as well, and then there would be a full Nightwing character who's standing on top of a bat signal, and yeah, there'd be literally nowhere I could possibly put them. It just wouldn't be. I just wouldn't be able to have both of them together, and it kind of wouldn't make sense to have the other one printed somewhere else. Now, I blew this guy up 200% scale. So obviously that came with some challenges. So I had to recut a decent amount of the base because even on my Sidewinder, it just wasn't going to print as it was. If we pull ourselves around the back of this as well, you will see that we have a lot of this railing. The problem is that here and here, the railing is floating. So I had to basically cut these pillars so that I could, because there's no flat surface, and just printing this on supports was never going to end particularly well. So I had to cut these up so I could sort of jigsaw them together. Now, in an ideal world, I would have had Luban, and Luban would have cut and keyed that on a grid for me. I didn't have Luban, so I had to do it with flat cuts in Netfab. And it went okay. They went together fine. It required a little bit of extra tweaking and things like that, but it all went together very nicely. I will do a 360 of this model in a moment. But there's some touches in this that I really, really like. So for a start, there are runes that are on all of his armor, and I did all of those with a chrome pen. And what it's meant is there is a real shine to those. They're highly reflective. The chrome pen really did its job, and it really did make those parts stand out quite well. I also used a chrome pen on his sword, and then I had to dirty it up a little bit. The sword didn't quite look the way I wanted it to. There's only one reason why he is able to stand up like this. So unfortunately, to get the legs to print right, I had to cut the majority of the key out of the feet. The feet key into this base. And he is quite front heavy. Even though he's got all of this sort of big cape thing on the back, the front of him is quite heavy, and he has a tendency to lean forwards. So I used PLA Stick from Repliflow, which I'll put a link to in the video description of that as well. And basically that allowed me to, that meant that it's a chemical bond between the key and the base. And in having that PLA stick in there meant that this guy is not moving anywhere. The rocking is actually the rocking of the whole base rather than him moving. I also had to cut up the sword so that it would print, so it would print sort of all nicely and everything, because it's got all of these sort of fins on the side of the sword. The way I needed to print it just didn't work the way it was. So I cut all that up. Again, PLA Stick has meant that this is now a rock solid sword, even though there are no keys. So that was really good. I had to split his legs in half. I used Repliflow, also a link in the video description, which is that resin that we've coated a lot of things in, and my God, did it hide some sins. So, so all of the body and legs were printed on both my my Fokoos Odin 5 and on my artillery Hornet, and it made a huge difference cutting them all up and being able to print them on those two machines. I was really surprised how much of him fit. So I had to sort of cut the head, I had to cut the arms, I had to cut the legs and do a couple other bits and pieces just because of how big and awkward the model was to try and get it to print. There were very few angles I could print this at, and as a result I had some ropey areas where I had support interface marks and things like that. To look at this model now, I don't think you'd actually know where those joins or where those cuts were. I did some cuts in his legs that you can't really see. I did some cuts in his waist that you can barely see. And even once I point out where they are, they still aren't that obvious. So I am very, very happy with how this printed. And the Repliflow from Repliflow really helped me to hide a few of those sins. The one area where I'd wished I'd used it a little bit more was on some areas of the cape. So the cape I had to cut into about 4 sections. Some of those sections you can see, but overall I'm very, very happy with the model. As I say, I cut up all of this base. The base was really easy to cut up because of all these lines. So because of all the brickwork, you could hide your cuts in that brickwork, which is what I tried to do. And then I've used a stone effect spray from Rust-Oleum, and it's a particulate spray. So it actually sprays out flecks as well as the paint, and it creates a very nice stone effect, but it also hides a lot of sins. So it'll hide a lot of layer lines, it'll hide a lot of, it's a very, very high build paint, and you have to be careful that you don't get it in any of your keyholes, because if you do, your model literally won't fit anymore. It does add a degree of height to all of this. It's also worth noting that if you've got areas you need to glue stuff to, you need to make sure that you tape those areas off, because otherwise you will be gluing two paint surfaces or you'll be gluing a key to a paint surface, not to the actual model. And then you're going to have a bad time when it comes to your model falling apart later on. So overall, he's about 2,000 hours of printing across 4 machines. So as I say, I used the Hornet, I used the Fokoos Odin 5. That was for the majority of the body. and the legs and the head and everything else, and the sword, all of that, all on those 2 machines. They are Ender 3 sized. When it came to the base, and it came to these cape, these sort of sections of cape, I had to use my Sidewinder X1, and I did print a decent amount of this on the Hydra as well when it was working. Check out our Hydra video if you want to try and get to terms with the drama of that. But overall, he's primarily airbrushed. I used a wax paint on all of his chainmail. That really helped me to hit the highlights, so you can get that sort of, you can get that chainmail effect. For the most part, he's airbrushed. I hand painted on a base color, and then my technique is that I base color it, and then after the base color's on, I will go over and I will start adding layers with my airbrush. That gives me some crisp lines, but it allows me to blur them as I need to, create that weathering as I need to, and everything else. So that is him. I'm very, very happy with how he came out in the end. He looks pretty much exactly as I envisioned him to, which is rare for me. The colours, I think, worked really well. I tried to really dull down the colours, give it that sort of, that gritty Batman noir feel, where it's sort of nothing is shiny and new. Everything is sort of like beaten up and busted down and worn in. So I sort of tried to create that layering. It's the reason why his tabard isn't white. It's that very sort of dirty brown. So he's, you know, he's been through it. He's been through battles. There's loads of battle damage over all his armor. You know, this is a utilitarian costume, not a, you know, a shining beacon like Superman is, for example. So yeah, I hope you guys liked it. If you want to check out Berserk's Patreon, I highly recommend it. He does some amazing models. I will put the link to his Patreon in the video description. Thanks very much for joining us. See you soon.